with our last segment for the day, the last item on our agenda. And that's the panel discussion titled Life in IP, IP in Life. We're meant to start at 3. Sorry for running a bit late, and thank you for bearing with us, specifically for our virtual audience. I've got members of my panel sitting there. Just quickly again, Darren, Senior Partner, Adams & Adams, trademark expert, Rochelle. Maureen is going to facilitate that introduction just shortly. She'll be joining us for the panel. And Maureen, who was my co-MC for one of the breakaway rooms this afternoon. So for this session, we're meant to be joined by Iman Rapeti, who's a well-known reporter and journalist. Unfortunately, she could not join us, but I think between the 4 of us, we'll hold it down. Yes, we will. So this, guys, is just meant to be a light-hearted conversation among colleagues, really demonstrating the omnipresence and pervasiveness of IP in life and life in IP, okay? And it really came about when we sat as a team exploring topics of what we can talk about, and then we realized that, wait a minute, Maureen is engaged, she's gonna be married soon, it's a big journey, and maybe let's talk about that. You know, what are some of the themes? And obviously then this topic came about, and we'll explore it just now. So I'll take my seat, let me do that. And Maureen, over to you.
Hello. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Lita, for that introduction. Yes, so on that personal note, I'm getting married, and quite an exciting time, but we've quickly noted that getting prepared for a wedding is quite hectic. It's not as simple as it initially seemed. But that being said, you know, one of the most exciting moments in my journey was looking for the wedding dress. And I think for most people it is as well. I visited a lot of stores. I've actually lost count of how many. But one thing remained consistent in my visits, and that was there were certain rules about, so I'll just go here. There were certain rules that happened to come up in all my visits. And 1 or 2 of them was that there was always a limitation in taking images of yourself in the dresses when you were fitting them on. And the other one was the number of people who could visit the store with you to see the dress. So I found that quite interesting, and the one day I asked one of the assistants, what is the reason for, you know, not allowing people to take, you know, photographs of themselves in the dresses, because that's quite a nice thing to go back home and look at yourself and say, oh, okay, I like this one, I didn't like it. But then they said, no, well, it's company policy to try and protect the designs of the dress. And I was like, oh, okay. Then I kind of went through like a little rabbit hole trying to figure out, okay, the dresses are online. You can still get the design of the dress if you really wanted to. But I thought, you know what, maybe it's better to actually have a chat with an industry expert, somebody who knows wedding dresses, who can maybe tell us more and tell me more as well about wedding dresses, where they came from. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Rochelle Van Vey. She is the founder of Van Vey Bridal Couture, a bridal boutique in Johannesburg, and she really knows about all this stuff. So I'm gonna actually pose a few questions at her, and hopefully we can get some insight on wedding dresses and how they got to this point that, you know, that's such an important part of a wedding day. Rochelle, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And I'd just like to, you know, just to start off to find out, what is the history of wedding dresses? How is it that, you know, the white dress became such a big thing on wedding days? And yeah, what was your history? How did you start at Van Vey?
Thanks for having me. As you guys gathered, she got her dresses from me, and she chose us, so we won. We're the top. Yeah, so we loved when she came in. I think maybe she could also see. My whole mission was 13 years when I started, after I actually got married as well, that there's nothing, no one concentrates on service and quality and stuff in South Africa. And also people only teach you how to import goods and not to export goods. So I really took a different approach to business as well. So I always tell everyone that comes for a job interview, dresses are number 2, service is number 1. And I think that's what you also experience as well. Then as she brought up as well, we've got the company policy of no photos. It is a very tricky one. And as I spoke to her this week as well, we were just chatting about everything. This whole policy of no photos, it's not always the greatest because you feel a bit upset you can't take photos, but at the same time, we need to try and cover ourselves. A lot of shops out there, they all sell the same type of products. And what I try to do different as well is also to do more unique stuff, more designer stuff. So I literally started when I opened my shop with 8 dresses I designed, and now we've got over 400. And we are now the biggest in Africa as well, but also we're very, very strict on designing policies as well. It is a big thing for us. Also, what we've done when I started, I actually went to, about 10 years ago, I went to Ukraine, and I ended up staying there and working there, and actually started designing my own brand. And something there that I learned a big lesson in my life. I had no contracts in place. I did everything. I designed, I worked in factories, I did all the pattern making, launched the designs, and then a year after that I sorted Barcelona Fashion Week. It really, really got to me. But I had to also, my husband just said it's school fees. You've learned, that's all. And also to actually fight something in a different country, it's very, very difficult as well. So I've learned a big lesson with also copywriting and stuff like that. Yes. So also the wedding with the dress, it's all romantic, it's all beautiful, but the business side of it, it can be tricky if the way we deal with our business and exporting and importing dresses. So yeah, I mean, the white dress came from Queen Victoria in 1840. She wore it, and I think from there in the Western society, it became a big thing. But nowadays, in all cultures, all religions, everything, the wedding dress is still number one. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's quite interesting, and I like that you mentioned the challenges that you experience, because that's quite a big thing, especially with a lot of fashion designers, is that they will always, you create this design, this beautiful design, and you put all your effort and hard work into it, which is the labor of your mental, your mental labor. And then you find somebody has just copied it and created something new. And while you speak of that, actually, we had a case a few years ago, also with a bridal boutique, and they created this design that you'll see on that side, on the far end there. That was a wedding design that this client of ours created, along with a suit for a well-known TV personality. And not long thereafter, she saw a new advert for Oriental Plaza using the same photograph and same design of her dress. So she then came up to us and said, guys, I don't know what to do with this, And we had to then sit down and actually look, what can she do, looking at where does the copyright sit, she's got the design of the dress, she created the dress, so she's got copyright there. Then she's got the photograph that she commissioned, so she had copyright in the photograph. So on that basis, we were able to write to the other side, to the people who posted on the Oriental Plaza website, to say you need to take this down because it is copyright infringement. You're creating an impression that you're somehow related to the boutique owner and the TV personality as if she consents or endorses your products, which is not the case. So luckily on that basis, we were able to get that advert taken down, but it doesn't always happen like that, especially if you're not sure on what rights you have and how to go about them, and being in a different country, you're not even sure if you can actually take action. It is important to be able to talk to someone who can at least let you know how to go about it. But that being said, okay, so, but what one dress that has actually really fascinated me is the Princess Diana dress. Rochelle, I don't know, this dress was a hit. Back in the day, look at those puffy sleeves. It looks like it was an actual thing. Please tell me why.
I still don't know. But the funny thing is, in fashion, with architecture, with paint colors, interior design, all of that stuff, there's a cycle of about 7-8 years that they actually say that fashion actually repeats itself and just in different formats. So they will use the outline and just revamp it, was modified with new ideas, fabrics, textures, and all the stuff like that. I think that's one reason why I brought this dress as well. I mean, it's got the massive sleeves. It's just, I thought it will also fit in with this Princess Diana's dress, just to say, sleeves are coming back. It's making it come back again, but just in a different format. And just more modernized way. So I think we adapt as we go. And if I can touch base on what you said, like you had that case with the Oriental Plaza with that photo, we police constantly our multimedia, our all media, social media, we have to do it. And I'm always at work, I always know what's going on. And you see, we've had also had to actually send a letter out. I've got a standard lawyer's letter
Yeah, that's fantastic.
that I sent to them to say, listen, I'm giving you so many days to take it off, otherwise we will go further. It does work, so it's quite nice. We've never had problems, but like I said, it is a full-time policing job to see who is using your stuff. And also 10 years ago, it wasn't like this. It's just when social media came in and all of that, everything is everywhere. So that's also something, it's becoming more difficult. Copying is becoming difficult.
So that's actually quite important that you're taking that initiative and taking those steps, because that plays such a crucial role in managing your brand, right?
No, you have.
So interestingly enough, there was a case about the Princess Diana dress. The designer of the dress has been involved in a 25-year legal battle to try and use her name to create garments again. So briefly, history on that. The Princess Diana dress created in the 1980s for a wedding in 81. The designer was David and Elizabeth Emanuel. They were a couple, and they created this beautiful garment. Once they created it, and they became famous instantly, and then unfortunately they divorced in the early 90s. When that happened, then Elizabeth Emanuel, the wife, continued with the brand. They registered the trademark. She was making garments for Richard Branson and his family. But then things didn't go so well. So when things went downhill, she decided to sell the business, and she assigned all the assets in the business, including the trademark, the registered trademark. She sold it to a third party, Mr. Ahmed, his name is. She sold these rights across, and then she couldn't trade anymore of her own name, and that was a complete, it was a problem, because that's her personal name. She wants to use it for her products. So in a long 25-year battle, she's finally been able to reach settlement where she can actually make use of the brand for about a year. They've just agreed on she can use it for a year, and then they'll see how it goes, which is a problem, especially when people use their own personal names to create, to use them as brands. It's great when you can claim the reputation, you get the goodwill, and it's part of your name. But what happens when you decide to, enter into future ventures, and then you sell off those brands? Then you're faced with a situation where you can't use your own personal name. So I think that was a lesson for her that, and for many other people, that if you are going to use your personal name to as a brand, then you need to consider that you can't sell it off and get a couple of millions and then open a new business and trade under the same name. So that was quite an interesting case on the Princess Diana.
Actually, didn't know the story.
Yeah.
But my name is Van Faye.
Yes, which is your surname. Well,
my surname.
Your surname, yeah.
But I spelled it different on logo because I just thought it was a bit,
but
just to make it a bit different.
Yes,
something to learn about that.
Yeah. Quite interesting.
That,
yes. There are a lot of these designers who use their own personal names, and it's always something that I think they need to, we always need to be aware of. Yeah. Okay, and as Rochelle mentioned, the top tips that she mentioned, which I quite liked, is sending out letters of demand, monitoring social media and monitoring the platforms. That's really quite important. And at the end of the day, you can't force people to make use of these tips. They always just need to decide on their own, really, is that something that's worth it? And I might add just, yesterday when I was thinking about my presentation, and saying that, I wasn't allowed to take photographs, but the designs were online, I went back to check her profile, and I realized that the dresses are there, but you don't see the full dress. You only see snippets of it. So you'll find a model who's sitting down, so you only see like the top half of the dress, which is awesome, because then you don't really see how it actually looks. You have to go in store to see it. And then she manages how much of it you can actually have access to. So I thought that was quite smart.
Yeah, we do and we also don't give too much information.
Correct.
I think with the young people these days, even when you interview people, they want to everything must be on social media and everything, and it's not good from a business point of view.
Yes,
you don't want to give everything away.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
No, thank you so much, Rochelle. That was fantastic. Yes, Darren. Do you want us to ask the I have a feeling it has something to do with it.
I want to know from you, not you,
Okay.
whether you can disclose what her dress is.
No, I might get a lawyer's letter.
There we go.
A duty of confidence has just been disclosed.
That's a big thing in business as well.
Yeah, tell us more.
No, actually, we get people that comes and say, "Oh, my friend bought a dress here. Can you quickly just show it to me?" And I was like, we just are. Even in our contract with our employees, they are not allowed disclosing any information. It's a big thing, and it's a small. We work with very high-end brides as well, and a lot of people don't want We're not allowed saying, that's the
Yes,
thing.
yeah.
It's a very secretive thing.
Sounds like you're
secret,
regulated by the Law Society. No, very interesting.
Thanks so much. Okay, over to you, Lee.
Awesome. Thanks, Mo. Am I on? Can you hear me? Excellent. Okay, so like Mo, I will speak about something that is white, that you do use quite often at the early stages of life, particularly as infants, at infancy, and that you might probably use when you're older. It's unlike a wedding dress that if you're lucky, you just wear once. And I will be talking about the diaper. And that's typically the next stage after people get married. You see little people that look like them surfacing. I'm a mom of 3. My kids are now aged 8, 5, and 3, but at some point they were all under 5. That was quite an overwhelming stage, but I'm still here, soldiering on. And so diapers are quite a thing that I got to know quite well during that time. It was fascinating for me to learn that the diaper was not around until the 1930s. I mean, I can't imagine not having a diaper. I can't imagine not having a diaper. A disposable diaper, I mean. I had them in the car, in the baby bag, sometimes in my bag, in every room in my house. To think that until then, people were using cloth nappies, and nappies made of muslin cloth. So yeah, I'm glad I was born at this time. So while that sounds ridiculous to me, it is what happened. So I will take you through quickly the diaper evolution. In the 1930s, it wasn't quite the disposable diaper that came out, but we saw what was called a disposable baby's napkin. Okay, you can just imagine from the name, it wasn't very successful. Fast forward 15 years later, a Swedish company suggested then using paper, just sort of layering the cloth diaper with paper and using that. That was also not very successful. It ended up in mush. So something had to be done. So in the late 1940s, we started seeing some success where a woman named Valerie Hunter Gordon, she invented what we call the paddy. That is the diaper on my left. What is this, the left? Yeah, my left, your right. I absolutely love this invention that she created because she also branded it. So it's quite nice when an invention is branded and launched in the market. And she created this using an old parachute. That's not really a household item. So she was quite innovative. And she stuffed the parachute with paper wedding and cotton wool. So we start to see at around about that time what would be the kind of skeleton of the disposable diaper that we have today. Around about this time, it was after the Second World War, which is interesting because there was a cotton shortage at that time, a shortage of cotton. So the demand for disposable diapers grew. Then along came a woman called Marion Donovan, and she was sitting in the UK. The paddy was invented in the paddy was invented in the UK, and Marion Donovan was based in the US. And she created this invention that you see on the right that's dated 1951. And what she did was to take a shower curtain, that's more like a household item, and she put paper napkins in it. And that was probably truly the skeleton of what we have today as a disposable diaper. So around about that time, market players, other companies started coming in and also creating disposable diapers. And around about the early 1960s, we saw the birth of some of the well-known brands worldwide today. What's interesting about the evolution of the diaper is that when it initially started, it was classified for trademark branding purposes under the category for textiles. And then it moved to the category for paper, and we can understand that now because paper was involved in that, innovation. And now it's been classified in the same category as medicines and pharmaceutical goods. And that's quite interesting for me because it was apparently considered a luxury item. Like what? So necessary, nothing luxurious about it. People weren't quite sure where to put it in the shops. Do we put it next to the bread? And then dad grabs bread and diaper. So I used to say to my husband, bring the diapers. I'm sure he didn't like hearing that sentence at that stage in our lives. Do you put it next to medicines? Do you put it? So we saw that kind of mimicked on the branding side in terms of trademark classification. As you can imagine, a lot of innovation went into this. I mean, now we have all sorts of patents being filed for the diaper, pertaining to the fit, to the shape, to the size. And what's interesting now is that there's a move towards eco-friendly diapers made of a biodegradable material. And obviously the packaging must also be biodegradable. So there's a big move towards that. And that's really because at some point, not so long ago, diapers accounted for 50% of the waste in our environment. That is not insignificant. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. More and more of that development in that direction. Now, I don't have to tell you that I went through hundreds of diapers with each child, okay? Because when they were all at newborn stage, I remember going through about at least 7 diapers a day. I mean, a little tinkle in that diaper, then you have to change them. You don't want them getting nappy rashes. Okay, a bit of it is obsession because you're a new mom, and then like a new mom a second time, and then like a new mom a third time. But that was the point. You go through a lot of diapers. And just from that, you can tell that it's $1 billion industry, okay? If you don't believe me, I'll show you. There, the stats, they speak for themselves. Now, these are based on regions such as Australia, South Korea, the US, and in 2014, the revenue generated by the diaper industry was valued at $39 billion. Last year, it was $47 billion. It's projected to generate $68 billion beyond 2020. Is that 2026? Not wearing my glasses. Okay. So yeah, so it's it's quite lucrative. And these stats, while they're not for South Africa, they speak to what is happening in the South African environment, because here the diaper industry in 2019 was valued at around 6 billion rand. That is not insignificant. And we've seen tremendous growth in terms of private labels entering the market. We've seen particularly clients of ours like Little Masters, local manufacturers building state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities, introducing good quality diapers, and just stirring up things in terms of competition in the market. And Darren, I think you can comment on this and some of the fundraising, particularly for Black industrialists, which has led to great success for our clients such as Little Masters.
Yes, I mean, I think we've got Nilesh. I don't know if you want to put your hand up. Very quiet fellow. He's the man behind Little Masters and many other things. And I'm very glad that he's here today. I, by chance, went about 20 kilometers south of Johannesburg to your factory, and really I was absolutely amazed. A real state-of-the-art South African factory by Black industrialists and producing fantastic Little Masters diapers, competing with the best products on the marketplace. So successful that we were there to discuss the passing off case. And that is always a backhanded compliment, by the way, when people start to copy you. But you don't see it that way, of course, when you're in that position. And we were introduced to them by another client called Uzunzele. They're specialists in grant funding for Black industrialists. And they were able to secure the funding with, of course, the business plans behind the product for Nilesh. And that was what I was seeing. That funding has actually moved on from there to funding for intellectual property for their investment overseas. So successful was the local brand. And of course, we've got Rand arbitrage at the moment, so the export market becomes very, very valuable and potentially lucrative. But of course, when you go overseas, you do not want to see your products, your brand, stolen or registered overseas. But not often can you afford to register your trademarks or your IP. And there is grant funding available to us. And he happens to be the very first person in South Africa who has achieved through an application that took some time to get that grant funding. And I think that's just what we wanted to share. It is showcasing local innovation, African innovation. And you've got an example of Nilesh sitting right there to exactly that point.
Absolutely. So more growth will happen, I think, because the South African birth rate apparently hasn't slowed down. It's been higher than any other country in the world in recent years. Well, which is a good thing. What did you say, load shedding? Whoa, put the lights on, put the lights on. Well, babies do not stay young forever, okay? They do grow up and they start having interests and pastimes. They go to school, and that's Darren. That's where you come in.
This
To
is where
tell
I
us
come
about. This is where you come
Right from then all the way until
all the way until.
until. So I'm going to dig into my bag of tricks, and I don't know if you've seen this, but it's definitely something that if you're a kid, I mean, whether you like sport or not, right, you're going to get one of these, whether it be future Springbok rugby, whether it be Kaizer Chiefs, whether it be
Not Kaizer Chiefs.
sorry, Mamelodi Sundowns, a client of ours, the one and only client. Liverpool Football Club, another one of ours, right? I'm going to bring you to a story about that in a second. Arsenal, whatever it be, you're going to get something like this future Springbok for the poor little kid, because sport is part of our culture, right? So I'm going to ask you, considering that the Springboks are actually playing on Saturday in a quarterfinal of the World Cup, Sunday. Maybe I can get this one right. When was the Springbok actually devised, and why? Okay, does anyone know? Hold that thought, right? Because I went further and got the. Does anyone recognize this top?
Anybody?
Bafana. Right, okay, I like that. Okay. And on Bafana top, you get, we'll get to the Bafana name in a second, because it's got a link with the Springbok name. That is the Protea, obviously. It's our national flower. Does anyone know when the Protea came into being? Right? 1976. There's other symbolism in 1976. Does anyone know why the Protea is used as our national flower? It's because it's one of the most resilient flowers around and flourishes after wildfires. And I think that symbolism in today's talk is also, again, part of our culture. And that is why the Protea is our national flower. Of course, it is on the Bafana top. And right now, the Proteas are playing Australia. So if you didn't know the answer to when the Springbok was devised, perhaps someone can put up our hand and just tell us what the score is right now. Sorry, what was that? 39 for 2, that's Australia, chasing 317. Okay, thank you for that. All right. Okay, so I hope to take your interest away from the score, but that was interesting for me right now. I went on a shopping spree yesterday, okay, to try and get some props for this talk, to compete with that, which is impossible, right, and to try and compete with that, which is also now impossible. And I went into, not Total Sports, but Sportsman's Warehouse in Sandton City, and I'm met by the most animated salesperson you can know. And he took me to the floor where they've got, or the side where they've got the replica shirts. Right? It takes a whole side. Right. And I asked him, I said, what is the most popular replica shirt at the moment? Anyone want to give it a guess? Replica, you say Springboks, what would you say? This includes football, Kaizer Chiefs, Mamelodi Sundowns, Liverpool, Orlando Pirates, he's got his arms crossed. Anyone? He said, without a shadow of a doubt, it's Arsenal. Right? Arsenal home kit is the most successful replica shirt at the moment. Home kit, not the away kit. Right? Sorry? Sandton City, right? So then I asked him, I said, what about South African shirts? And he said, no, Sundowns, very popular, home shirt. But Kaizer Chiefs also popular. When we looked at the Kaizer Chiefs, I said, there's a yellow one that you'll all see. And then he said, but the most important one is the one that actually shares the same kind of green and gold as the Springbok rugby. So I found that quite interesting as a kind of merging of symbolisms, and Kaizer Chiefs adopting that type of branding, which is, again, one of the most popular shirts. So I asked him, I said, what about my club, Liverpool? Okay, sorry about that. He said, well, funny enough, old guys like you come into our store, right, and they buy the Liverpool. It's very popular, but only in sizes extra small, because they're buying it for their kids. But the kids don't want Liverpool. So this is I wish he was here, actually, because he was extremely animated. And I said, okay, then can you just tell me about the Bafana top? He goes, aye. No one buys the Bafana top. And I said, He said the only people who buy the Bafana top are international people who come out here and have got no idea how successful or not they are of in South Africa. So clearly the success of the club is very directly correlated to the success of these replica shirts, and it is big business. So getting back to the Springbok, it actually says on this little guy, it says since 1891, right? It was devised on the second tour to the UK by our national side. And the reason for devising the Springbok, the reason for putting the Springbok on the jersey was because they knew that the British press would dub them something, they would call them something, and they wanted to give them something to call them, and they called it the Springboks. And that's how the Springboks arose, of course. So the Springboks faced left and now it faced right, and through its history, of course, it's meant different things, some of them controversial, but I'd like to think right now it's actually quite a nice inclusive emblem. It's protected by the South African Rugby Union, and it sits there. So I'll move back to the Bafana name. So the Bafana name, ironically, was adopted by the press. It's what the press nicknamed our national football team. And it's Zulu for the boys understand. Right? It wasn't registered by them. It was registered by another chap in 1993. And there was also led to debate about who should own the Bafana trademark. Because the South African public felt very much that, in fact, because it had been adopted by the press, been coined by the press, and had been made famous by the public themselves, it should be national, a national emblem, and nationally owned, and perhaps owned by the government, or not owned by anyone at all, free for use. But what it is owned by the South African Football Association, and they had to pay 5 million from the chap who registered in 1993. But just a nice correlation between the two. Again, if you look very closely at both of these jerseys, you'll see on the tag here, it says, support rugby, not crime. Real fans don't buy fakes. That's what it says here. And there's a hologram. And over here, you get a hologram as well. You won't find a hologram on the wedding dress, but these are designed to obviously identify authentic product. But I hasten to say that I paid 1,000 Rand for this and 329 Rand for this. And every national person in South Africa, I think, has a right to support the national side. And that is why you see counterfeit products at every single traffic circle, at every single flea market. And I guess that gives rise to really a socioeconomic debate about whether or not, how does one stamp out that in an area where people want to support their football side? And for me, the only way of stamping out that is to remove the incentive to counterfeit, and that is to reduce the price. But would it be right to ask a Coq Sportif to reduce this to next to nothing for a genuine, really well-made garment? And so the rights of sponsors come into play. And without the sponsors, you don't get the tournaments. And we've seen this in the ambush marketing that took place in the 2010 World Cup with the Bavaria Babes, and why FIFA was so incensed when these girls came and allegedly ambushed, we represented the girls, right? But I guess what it is to say, there's an ongoing debate about balancing the rights of the right to support your national team and the rights of the sponsors the rights of sponsors to get a profit from supporting the local tournament. I'm going to move off that for a moment, because actually, if I have to look at beyond children, the one thing that's ubiquitous, both in my life personally, and I'll explain very briefly in a second, but also in a South African context, is the tennis ball. The tennis ball, whether you use it to play tennis, for what it's meant, whether you use it as a stress ball, whether you're throwing it at your wall and annoying your parents who are trying to sleep on a Sunday afternoon, whether you're taping the one side and using background cricket and backyard cricket in the yard, whether you're in the townships and playing with a tennis ball because you can't afford a football, and whether you're putting it under your bicycle to make your life more comfortable, this is a ubiquitous symbol of South Africa, right? And its bounce back ability is remarkable. And again, another symbol, I think, in the context of today, of the bounce back ability of the South African culture. Why it's got particular relevance for me is that I actually ended up working for Dunlop Sassenger in London for the Sports Factory. And when you mentioned 1840, the modern tennis ball, the original tennis balls were made of human hair and animal intestine, found in the attics of Westminster Abbey in the 1920s, dating back to the 1600s. But the modern tennis ball, we actually came around, same as the wedding dress, 1840, by a chap called Charles Goodyear, who invented vulcanized rubber. He was joined by a guy much later, called John Boyd Dunlop, who was making pneumatic tires, right? And those pneumatic tires, the combination of Goodyear and Dunlop, two big rubber factories, okay, the spin-offs from the rubber created golf balls originally, and then created tennis balls. And once it created tennis balls, you got the production of a diversified business, being a sports business. And that's why you have the Dunlop sports business today. And that's the business that I ultimately joined. And in 1902, the first tennis balls were supplied to Wimbledon, and Dunlop Sassenger were one company. And that is the longest standing contract ever of supply and sponsorship for a single tournament. In fact, it still exists today, almost 120 or over 120 years later. I'll cut it short and take you all the way back to 1995. There was a management buyout by an equity firm of the Dunlop Sassenger business. They paid £320 million for the business. By 1998, they realized they'd paid far too much. And that coincided with me arriving in shores of the UK. And I was then employed. And I would like to think that I was employed to turn around the business, but actually, I was employed because I was the cheapest resource around. I was this this upstart from the colonies that arrived in the UK, and they need someone cheap. They couldn't afford the local guys in the situation they're in, and I got to be their IP counsel. And for me, it was absolutely fascinating because I got to see IP giving CPR to a company, literally. If it wasn't for the sweating of their IP assets, that company would have been liquidated. It was eventually sold in 2004, Sports Direct. It's like Sportsman's Warehouse on steroids. And the story actually continues very briefly. It was bought because of the sweating of this IP asset, because of the licensing regime. And they were like Sportsman's Warehouse selling brands, and they actually started buying brands and using the Dunlop model to then license them out. Donay, Lonsdale, Carrymore, all those Kangol, all those heritage brands, Title for boxing. And what it meant 2 years later when they did list is they could get a record listing on the FTSE by creating an IP narrative to the listing documents. A very, very interesting time indeed. And so again, I saw the ability of IP within a company to transform it into something significantly more value potentially than it was. And just to close the loop on the Dunlop story, that was sold back to it wasn't sold back, it was sold to Sumitomo Rubber Industries about 3 years ago for 132 million. So he got a return on his investments, obviously a slightly different company to what it was in 1995. But for those of you who play golf and are familiar with the Srixon brand, Srixon is actually Sumitomo Rubber Industries. It's the name of their golf ball. It is in fact, and always has been, a Dunlop golf ball, but they couldn't use Dunlop in the Far East, so they coined it a Srixon ball, and that's why you get the Srixon brand. And they purchased it back for 132 million. So just to close the loop on that story. And then finally, getting back to our chap, Mr. Goodyear, you'll remember he's the guy who invented vulcanized rubber. He, unfortunately, at the age of 59, he's quite a sad ending actually. His daughter was dying in New York, and he traveled to New York to go and visit her while she was dying and to be by her side. And he arrived too late. And he was struck by the grief that he in fact also collapsed and passed shortly thereafter. And why I bring a sad story into this is that actually sadness is unfortunately part of life. But it also shows the power of the brand, because Goodyear, his name, has outlasted him for over a century. And that's the power of IP. And that's where we're going to go very briefly, I think, in towards legacy protection, our next element of this particular talk. I missed this slide. It's quite an important slide. Very briefly, one of the reasons why Dunlop was in distress was because they lost the endorsement value of the woman on the left, Steffi Graf, in the 1980s. Those of you who played tennis will all have had their first rackets. If you were born in the 70s, you got your first racket, it was a Dunlop racket. And it was because Steffi Graf played with it, right? And John McEnroe. But they failed to renew her contracts over a dispute. And they lost significant market share. And that's one of the reasons why they were in such a state by the time 1998 came around. And I guess the parallel today of the value of a single person on an endorsement value is, in my opinion, Taylor Swift. And you can just read the stats below. That is the modern day Steffi Graf. The value of one individual onto a particular brand, to breathe life into it. So I think that this is a nice segue just to go into legacy preservation. I'm going to suggest that we fast forward this. I think I dominated the mic too much, and your story was extremely interesting. So I'm blaming both of you, but that's it for me.
Thank you, Darren. As Darren has mentioned, trademarks are, in fact, IP is incredible because long after Mr. Dunlop passed away, his name still lives on. And we know about it today. It was interesting to hear about the history. And as a team, we found ourselves working in this area of legacy preservation through intellectual property. And it's quite an important aspect because it goes beyond life as we've discussed it. We've moved from wedding dresses to babies to children, and now we are sort of in the beyond. And in our experience, we've worked with, some of you may recognize him, the family of Todd Matshikiza, as well as the family of Victor Ntoni. So Todd is a well-known composer. He actually wrote the King Kong play, which debuted, I don't want to get the year wrong, but I was not around at the time, okay? And that play was quite powerful. It played an important role in bringing out the story of South Africa to the world during the struggle against apartheid. Victor Ntoni, a well-known jazz musician, whose music is really good. My husband and my late father were actually fans of his. So it's been an honor to work alongside the family, and his music was also quite an integral part in the struggle against apartheid. We found ourselves working with these families, not only in them, we also worked with the Steve Biko Foundation. We've worked with Sam Zima, and his, is that a trust or a foundation? We'll work quite closely with them, where we're trying to use intellectual property to preserve their legacy. What do I mean? So typically a client will come to you and say, I'm from Van Wey Bridal Couture. I want to protect my trademark. We'd do a search, we'd file the trademark, and then you would sort of use the trademark and commercialize it to grow the business and obviously grow the profits, etc. But we found that on this side of legacy preservation is that everything is already out there. The task is to actually get what's out there and identify what is intellectual property. What are some of the things that people produce, whether it's screenplays, whether it's music, whether it's books like what Stephen Biko wrote. I think it was titled I Write What I Like. Whatever it is, it's out there in the market, working with the families, the trust organization, and almost imagine a spreadsheet in your mind, making a listing of what all of that is. And then sort of putting the genie back in the bottle, trying to identify who owns the intellectual property in this, whether it's copyright, whether it's trademarks. Does the family own it? Does the trust organization own it? Yay or nay? If they don't, who owns it? We try and approach those people for permissions so that the custodians of the legacy are able to use that intellectual property. Imagine an event or a lecture to commemorate the life of Steve Biko. You want the family and the custodians of the legacy to be able to use the intellectual property that sits within that legacy and estate, if it's not owned by the family. So commercialization of the intellectual property in this instance takes a different direction, as opposed to, and there you commercialize to make sure that there's consistency and legitimacy in the messaging that lives long after the person has passed on. And thereafter we monitor, like Rochelle has said, we monitor and make sure that the use is as it should be, what we found ourselves doing with the Sam Zima. So Sam Zima is the guy who took the photograph, that iconic Hector Peterson photograph. Unfortunately, I don't have it on the slides here. So we started working with him and the custodians of his legacy. He's now passed on, to make sure that we collect the licensing fees for the use of that photograph. Okay, and that has been very successful. In fact, Mo has been the one championing that. And that's been good. And that's sort of like one of the benefits of some of these intellectual property rights is that they outlive the author. And if you have the right structures in place and sort of the right kind of legal guidance, you are able to ensure that the legacy lives on and the messaging is consistent with what the person stood for during their lifetime. But it's not only for iconic figures in our history. Mo has worked with the Basotho people and the Basotho king, along with Darren, to try and help them preserve the legacy preserve their culture. Yeah, take it away, Mo.
All right, I'll try and be quick to just demonstrate. So Darren and I have worked quite closely with the Basotho cultural preservation. And I'll just quickly, Darren, if you don't mind, be my model, just briefly. I'm going to show you this iconic blanket. Is one of the Basotho blankets. It's, there we go. I need to dress you, so if you don't mind. There we go. Right on, just hold it there for me, thank you. Perfect. So this is the iconic Basotho blanket. It plays a very significant role in the Basotho cultural heritage. You'll see that there are different designs on the blanket and they have very significant meanings. So if you don't mind, the next slide for me. If you can turn around, Darren, you'll see there's a corn cob. You know, this is the corn is a staple food in Lesotho, so it's very iconic and signifies prosperity and wealth. And you'll see that there is a stripe that runs on the blanket. This was initially a weaving fault when the blanket was manufactured, but it has become a distinct feature of the blanket, which is able to distinguish these blankets from any other type of blankets. I think he looks great. I hope he thinks so too. He's a proper Mosotho man. So yeah, another dress, yes. So these symbols are very significant, and this blanket is usually worn in different aspects of life. When someone is born, they get a blanket. When they get married, they get a blanket. And even when they die, the blanket is put on their casket as a form of them moving on. Just briefly on the history of these blankets, King Moshoeshoe I in 1860 was given this type of blanket, and he loved it so much that he let go of his leopard skins and carried on wearing it. And in 1865, when Lesotho was under siege, then he asked Queen Victoria to make Lesotho a British protectorate. And when she agreed, he said that she actually put a blanket of protection over Lesotho. So that also gives it that symbolic meaning. But yeah, so I don't know if you may have seen it in about 2017, this garment that was made by one of Powerhouse. It was a shirt, and you'll see that it has similar features to the Basotho blanket. However, it's not necessarily exactly how it's supposed to be. It's got a giraffe. There are no giraffes in Lesotho. So that was quite interesting that they just added some features there. And you'll see that the stripe runs horizontally instead of vertically. That vertical line, it has to be vertical, and as it's worn, it has to run vertically, which signifies growth. But in this instance, it was done quite differently. And it was a huge debate as to whether this was cultural appropriation or appreciation. I mean, once these shirts went out, look, a lot of people wanted these blankets, which is great, but it wasn't done correctly. The symbols were different. The lines were different. It just had a completely different meaning to what it actually is supposed to be. So that was a debate that has completely gone on, and there's no actual answer as to whether it was appreciation or appropriation, because there are pros and cons to each side. But it was actually something that we thought it was interesting, because even though this blanket is has a cultural significance, the designs on the blanket have been protected as trademarks. We filed trademarks for the actual blanket, how it looks in different colors, where we filed for the trademark in black and white, covering various colors, so it gives it wide protection. We've got copyright in the actual designs. Aranda, which is a client of ours, creates these designs with the Lesotho royal family. And they create these type of these blankets, and that has the copyright protection there as well. And or some of the royalties from the sales of these blankets goes back to the Lesotho people, and they're able to create schools, and they use those funds for the benefit of the people. So that was actually something that's quite interesting, and it's a legacy protection. It's protecting the cultural heritage, but also using IP in order to do that. But then that just shows that there is life in IP and IP in life even afterwards. Thank you. Thank you, Darren. You've been a great
Sit
model.
down now.
You may. Thank you.
It's getting quite warm in there.